Hey guys, I am Game Advisor and welcome back to another Icarus update video. Today we're going to be covering week 45, which is called Mounts 2. With that being said, let's jump right into it. First up, let's talk about the new Husbandry tree. The new Husbandry tree is basically just a new talent tree that is going to be within Icarus. It has tons of little buffs in it, such as making it so that your mounts don't cost as much to feed, as well as some other kind of random ones in there, maybe making the cost of creating structures for your animals a little cheaper that are specifically designated to go to animals, such as like a feeding trough or a bed or a saddle or things like that. But at the end of the day, most of those perks are just not worth taking. The only ones that are really impactful to your gameplay are going to be the ones that are all the way at the bottom of the tree, which include things like a 5% increased movement speed to all of your mounts. Now that has a lot of power whenever you're trying to travel a long distance. They've also gone ahead and adjusted some important mount mechanics and fixes to make them a little bit more balanced. So the biggest change they've done with the mount fixes and the new mechanics is the fact that they've kind of fixed the buffalo mount. Originally, the buffalo mount only had some extra inventory slots and couldn't carry any extra weight, which was pretty useless for most players, so people just wouldn't use the buffalo and they would use the faster mount, as it was only a slight health decrease and it couldn't attack, which it didn't do much damage anyways, so people just weren't using it. So what they've done here is they've actually increased the amount of weight your buffalo mount can carry. They've done this by making it so the default saddle will allow the buffalo to carry 300 pounds of weight, or kilograms, whatever you want to call it, versus 600 kilograms if you're using the advanced saddle, which makes that advanced saddle, once again, actually useful for once, because now you can carry enough stuff in your buffalo to make it worth having that extra weight. This can make your mining runs much faster and make it so you don't have to walk slow back, or make it so that you can get all of it in one run and still run quickly back to your base. They've also added the ability for you to hand feed and water your mounts. This is pretty straightforward. You hold a piece of food in your hand slot, then you just go ahead and feed them with right click, and it should go ahead and give them a little burst of HP, as well as restoring whatever stats are associated with that food item. So if you give them a berry, they'll get some food and water. If you give them a watermelon, food and water. If you give them a piece of corn, they might only get food. Again, it's pretty straightforward here. It's just nice to be able to do it. I do want to point out that you cannot do it with juvenile mounts. You can only do this with ones that you have fully tamed, but it's great for when you're in the field. They've also adjusted it so that now your mounts won't die whenever you're far away from your base. This is really nice because a lot of players were losing their mounts due to the fact that they were just simply too far away from their base and couldn't store enough food for them to live without making like 20 feeding troughs. So now when you're far enough away, they just can't starve to death. So you'll be totally fine on that. I don't know the exact distance. I'm guessing it's probably just about a kilometer or two. So if you're more than that away, you really don't need to worry about your animals. If anybody knows the exact distance, please feel free to let us know down in the comments below. On top of all of that, they've also made it so different vegetables and fruits will now affect the animals differently. So for an example, let's say we feed a berry to our pet, it's going to get a very tiny amount of food and water. Say you feed it a watermelon, it's going to get a lot of food and water. So there's actually a reason for you to not just feed them berries the whole time now. It's actually worth your time to throw the watermelons, pumpkins, corn, any of the foods that are a little bit better whenever they're compared to the berries. The berries, of course, can still stack to 100, which does give them an advantage. But again, they're only getting about 1 to 2% nutrition every time you feed them one. Now, they do also talk about some of their future mount plans when it comes to the whole mounting system. I'm not really going to go too in-depth on this, but what I will say is that they do plan on adding mount leveling and talents for the mount itself. This means the mount will level. It'll go to level 2 and 3 and so on while you're in a mission, and it apparently might even have some form of talents. I think this is going to take the form of like extra stamina or move speed, but I don't really know yet. We'll have to wait and see when it comes out. They also talk about the fact that they have mounts planned already for their new DLC, which is something that's going to be really exciting, as I know there's going to be some pretty crazy creatures in there. And then they also state that the Icarus modding community went ahead and made a bear mount available to people. Now, I do want to point out that while you can get the bear mount through the mods, this will not be implemented into the main game at this point in time. The devs have already stated right here that they have no plans to currently put the bear mount into the game. It is still cool, so if you want to check it out, you can check out Icarus mods. It's a whole thing. A lot of players don't even know about it, so it is a thing. If you guys want to see videos on that, please let us know and we'll go ahead and check that out for you. With all this being said, there are going to be 3 future distinct game modes that they want to separate from each other. These are going to be the missions, the outpost, and the open world mode. Each of them are supposed to be distinct, as we already know what missions and outposts are, but they want to make open world mode kind of its own thing. This is basically just going to replace the outpost maps that are Styx and Olympus, so we're going to have those as our new open world modes. At the moment, just to clarify for everybody, it looks like the new open world mode will kind of be just like a persistent mission that never ends. There's no goal for the mission, you can drop into it whenever you want. It still has all the normal stuff on the map for whatever difficulty you chose, and nothing else has changed. Basically the same thing we have right now for the big map outpost that we have access to. However, it's important to note that they want to make open world mode its kind of own thing. And to that point, I want to point out something for you that they said earlier up here in the actual update. And that's the fact that the Husbandry tree releasing today is one of those features. And as we move forwards towards multi-mission persistence in the future, we aim to expand these opportunities for players' choice with addition of mount leveling and talents. Now, the reason I want to point this part out right here, multi-mission persistence, is because multi-mission persistence suggests that we're going to have multiple missions that we can do within one drop. I don't think this will be our open world mode. I think it could turn into open world mode at some point, but currently I do not believe that is their plan for open world mode. At the moment, open world mode is just going to be the big map outposts that have the entire map on them with all the bosses and all the mobs on normal difficulty, all that stuff. Again, I just want to make sure this is really clear. This is not in the game yet, but they said they are moving towards multi-mission persistence. This is something that everybody's been asking for. Nobody wants to drop in, build up to tier 4, kill one thing or do one thing or make an item and then leave and lose all that progress. It just doesn't feel good. Versus dropping in, getting to tier 4, doing 3 or 4 kind of medium to small missions, or even 4 large ones that might take several hours, and then leaving, because it makes it worth your time to go and craft some of these high-end things. And to that point, I want to talk about the next thing that they mentioned, which is the narrative chain missions. I think this is a great idea, as basically what they're wanting to do is make chain missions that are more clear-cut as to storytelling elements. I think this would be great as, say, when you drop in, you could get one mission and it says you need to build up to tier 4 and craft this item. And then maybe the mission says, oh crap, we need you guys to go craft some other items and go kill some bosses and maybe go run over here to this part of the map to explore it and find a mining laser. And then, okay, now we finally actually got what we needed to craft that right item this time because you broke it the first time or something like that. There's a ton of ideas they could do here. It will also expand upon the lore of the game, which many people don't know anything about. So I think this is just a fabulous idea. I really want to see this put into the game. I want to see these narrative chain missions implemented in such a way that they coalesce or kind of go along with these multi-mission persistent things, because that would be huge for the player base. So many players would come back. If they do that right when they launch their DLC, I honestly think a lot of people I know that have quit Icarus would come right on back to check out the fact that you can now do multiple missions and not one tiny mission in a single run. That is just huge for players. That's been something that everybody's been asking for a very long time. But aside from that, they do have a couple other minor changes down here in the changelog I just want to mention for you. The main one being the fact that hedgehogs, the little basic wooden hedgehog things, will now actually damage you as a player. Not a ton of damage, but hey, don't stab yourself with it on accident. It is something you can do in the game now. There is a ton of husbandry talents, and they talk about a lot of that right here and some of the more details on those things. But I'm going to be honest with you guys, husbandry talents are just not that useful. Sure, they have their place in the game, but the fact that they haven't given us any extra talent points to put into it until we have mounts being more of a viable option and worth actually getting for people, I just don't see it happening. Now, I will say, if they made it so that, say, you could shoot a bow on the back of a mount or a gun, that would be huge. Players would definitely be willing to spend 30 talent points to get that. because that's such a powerful thing to have, and it would make doing certain bosses much easier for players who struggle with it. I think there's a lot of things they could really do to encourage people to use mounts, and they could do with this talent tree, because personally, I don't think 5% move speed for a mount is going to be enough to actually warrant somebody deciding to go and spend 20 points to get down to it. At the moment, the talent tree kind of feels like haphazardly thrown together, and like developers who didn't play the game kind of came up with them. Like, who really cares about a 30% reduced cost and making, a saddle? It's just leather. Like, who cares? Like, that's not going to really even save me but maybe one animal kill. Most players are not going to want to spend talent points on that. They'd rather spend it on extra damage or extra move speed or extra farming stuff. There's a lot of other places you could put it. So personally, again, I can see people who might want it, but for the most part in the greater Icarus community, people are just going to ignore this talent tree. And with all that being said, that's pretty much all I've got for you today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Game Advisor. I want to give a big shout out to our channel members, which include Caustic FPV, Jim Phillips, and Jonathan S. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm Game Advisor, and I'll see you next time.